Stop right now. If there's noise around you, let the silence settle. What's coming isn't background content. This isn't something you scroll past. You were directed here by something greater than any algorithm could understand. Set the phone down if you need to. Give this your full attention, because what's about to unfold in the next few minutes was prepared specifically for you. You were traded, replaced by someone who seemed easier to mold, easier to bend, easier to keep small. And in that moment, the enemy planted the lie that the problem was you. Too difficult, too intense, too complicated, too much. Chosen one, that was the greatest deception anyone ever tried to brand onto your soul. You weren't discarded because you were difficult. You were discarded because you were free, and freedom destroys those who only know how to control. You cannot cage a river. You can dam it for a season, but eventually the water finds its way, and that is exactly what happened to you. But today, right now, in this exact moment, something happened in the heavenly court. A decree shifted, and what looked like the greatest humiliation of your life was just reclassified by heaven as a turning point. What they called rejection, heaven called redirection. What they called a flaw, heaven called a flame. What they labeled a problem, the throne room labeled a promise. You didn't arrive here because of an algorithm. You were sent. This is divine alignment. And what they did when they traded you for someone easier, without knowing, without understanding, was release God's chosen. Release you into the exact season where you were always meant to be. Now let me speak to what you've actually been living. Because the wound isn't just the replacement. The wound is the realization that arrived slowly, like cold water rising, that it was never really love, that what felt like connection was really just utility, that you were needed the way a tool is needed and discarded the way a tool is discarded when something more convenient came along. That kind of revelation doesn't land all at once. It seeps in, and it changes how you see everything that came before. You remember the moment you found out. Maybe you saw a post. Maybe someone told you. Maybe you just noticed the silence that replaced you, filled now with someone else's presence, someone more agreeable, someone who never pushed back, never asked hard questions, never made them feel the discomfort of being seen clearly. And you stood there with something unnameable moving through your chest. Not quite anger yet, not quite grief yet, something older and heavier than both. Then came the loop. You know the one. It starts somewhere around 3 in the morning when the house is quiet and your mind refuses to be. Was I too difficult? Was I asking for too much? Was I the problem all along? Maybe if I had bent a little more, given a little more, needed a little less. The loop doesn't argue with you. It just replays. Scene after scene, question after question, and by the time the sun rises, you're exhausted before the day even begins. Your body learned something during that relationship, and it hasn't forgotten. It learned to stay ready, to scan the room before you enter it, to read the temperature before you speak, to armor up the moment you feel the first hint of disapproval. Hand that armor. You haven't been able to take it off, have you? Even now, even with people who aren't trying to control you, even in spaces that are genuinely safe, the armor stays on because your nervous system doesn't know it's over yet. You've watched from a distance, haven't you? Watched who came after you. Maybe you tried not to look, but you looked, and you recognized it. The early signs of the same pattern beginning to form. The small corrections, the subtle diminishments, the gradual reshaping of someone new into the mold you refuse to fit. And there's a grief in that too, because you know what's coming for them, and you know there's nothing you can do about it. Meanwhile, the practical things have suffered. Decisions you should have made months ago are still sitting unresolved. Sleep that should restore you leaves you more tired than when you went to bed. Money flows in but disappears before it makes sense, because the inner chaos makes it impossible to think clearly enough to build anything. Everything is technically moving, but nothing feels like momentum. Because you're still operating in survival mode, still fighting a battle that ended without a ceremony, without a conversation, without the closure you deserved. If this word is landing on you as confirmation of what the Spirit has already been whispering in those quiet moments, then pause right here. Type something in the comments. Not because a number matters, but because agreement is prophetic. When you say yes to what God is already speaking over you, something moves in the Spirit. So if this is your word, let your yes be known. And then, before you close your eyes tonight, pray this. Lord, give me clarity, not as a feeling but as a knowing. In the next 72 hours, let discernment arise in me that doesn't depend on what I can see. Open my understanding from the inside. That's it. Simple, interior, anchored in trust. What you've been carrying has a name, and there is a path through it. I put together something called the Solomon Code, a guide built specifically for the person who has been where you've been and is ready to move differently. Not with bitterness, not with self-protection, but with genuine wisdom. You'll find it in the pinned first comment beneath this video. Look there when you're ready. There is a cave in Scripture called Adullam. David fled to it when Saul's jealousy turned to obsession, when the man who once loved him decided that his presence was a threat to the throne. And in that cave, David didn't collapse. He didn't plot revenge. He didn't write declarations demanding acknowledgement. He went deep, he wrote, he prayed. He led the broken, the distressed, the discontented who gathered to him, and he turned a cave into a formation ground. The darkness of hiding became the school of governing, not in spite of being replaced, because of it. There are things God can only shape in you when the approval of the wrong people has been removed. Now let me tell you what actually happened to you, and to them. Control doesn't work where there's a defined identity. A controller needs a vacuum. They need someone still searching for who they are, still asking permission to be themselves, still willing to shrink in exchange for acceptance. The moment you refuse to shrink, the moment your identity becomes non-negotiable, the mechanism breaks. Not because you became difficult, because you became yourself. And an authentic self cannot be controlled, so they traded you for someone who still had the vacancy they needed, someone who would let the mold be pressed, someone who would stay smaller. The prophet saw this. 1 Samuel 18 records the moment Saul's eyes changed, the moment the Spirit's pleasure on David became visible to everyone in the room, and Saul could not bear it. He kept a jealous eye on David from that day on. Not because David did anything wrong, because David was something Saul couldn't manufacture. And what happened next is what always happens when a controller loses the one they could not control. Saul's kingdom didn't crack because David acted against him. Saul's kingdom cracked because God stopped honoring Saul. The problem was never David. The problem was Saul's heart. And that is true of your situation. The problem was never you, it was their heart. The Psalms saw this too. Psalm 37 to 12:13 in the ESV reads, "The wicked plots against the righteous and gnashes his teeth at him, but the Lord laughs at the wicked, for he sees that his day is coming." God is not anxious about what they did to you. He is not scrambling to correct it. He saw it coming. He already moved the pieces. And the laughter described there is not cruelty. It is the settled confidence of sovereignty. Now I want to give you something practical. Joseph was sold by his own brothers, traded for 20 pieces of silver by the people who were supposed to be his family, his covering, his people, discarded by blood. And every single thing that Joseph built, Pharaoh's trust, the position to save nations, the platform to preserve his own family, every single thing was only possible because he was removed from the cage of his brother's jealousy. His discard was not an interruption to his purpose, it was the portal to it. Genesis 50:20 says it plainly in the ESV. "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." Tonight, before you sleep, I want you to do 3 things. First, write down what you could not be or do while you were under that control. What parts of yourself did you suppress? What gifts did you stop exercising? What conversations did you never get to have? Name the prison. Write it down. Second, write down what has quietly diminished in that environment or for that person since you left. Not to gloat, not to track their fall, but to give your soul the evidence it needs that your presence had actual weight, actual value, that was consistently minimized but never actually absent. Third, write down what has only become possible for you since you were freed. What has opened? What conversations, what clarity, what sense of self has begun to return? Reframe the discard as a portal, because that is precisely what God meant it to be. The Joseph inventory is real. It is a starting point. But a single key doesn't build a house. I gave you a key tonight, but to live in what God is calling you into, you need more than a key. You need a framework. You need a system. And that is what the Solomon Code is built to give you. You don't need them to realize what they lost. You need wisdom to govern what God placed in your hands. The era in which you were controlled is over. God has lifted from you the burden of proving your worth to people who were never equipped to recognize it. That season is closed. What begins now is different. It is the era of governing. Governing your mind, governing your home, governing your decisions, governing your peace. And to govern, resistance isn't enough. Anger at what was done to you isn't enough. You need what Solomon asked for when God said ask for anything. Solomon asked for discernment, not power, not vindication, discernment. Because a person who can see clearly is more dangerous to darkness than a person who is simply angry. The Solomon Code is not another devotional to add to a shelf you don't visit. It is a path in 3 movements, built for someone who has already been through the fire and is now ready to build. The first movement helps you diagnose exactly where the gaps are, where control left its marks in your thinking, in your patterns, in the way you relate. The second movement quiets the soul, not with positive thinking, but with the specific kind of stillness that Solomon describes as the beginning of wisdom. The third movement is a daily discernment protocol anchored in the book of Proverbs. Practical, repeatable, built for real life with real demands. You don't need to know Hebrew. You don't need extra hours carved out of an already full day. This was built for the person standing exactly where you are. Find it in the pinned first comment beneath this video. The Solomon Code, it's waiting for you there. Drop your declaration in the comments right now. 3 words. Write this. I know myself. That's your decree for today, not for the algorithm. As a prophetic agreement with what God has already spoken over you. And then, tell me where you're watching from. Your city, your state. Because God is assembling His chosen ones, and I want to see the geography of this movement. If this word reached someone in your life who was traded and never told the truth about why, share this with them. Not as a task, as an act of love. And when you're ready, tonight, tomorrow morning, next week, the Solomon Code will still be in the pinned first comment. It isn't going anywhere. I know the exhaustion that makes us delay good things. I know how accumulated weight turns intention into inertia. So I'm not pushing, I'm just leaving the door open. You decide when you walk through it. The path will be there. May the wisdom from above be the ground beneath your feet today. May your soul find the rest it has been searching for. Until we meet again.